The pen was already moving when the monitor on the counter crackled, and Sungmin heard his husband's voice come out of the little white speaker beside the fruit bowl, talking to somebody who was not him. "You're going to stay here with your dad," Jinho said. "He's better at this than me. He always was. I only ever got good at other things." Sungmin's hand stopped on the second letter of his own name. "And when I'm not here anymore," Jinho said, and his voice went thin in a way Sungmin had not heard in 2 years. "I just want you to know, I was here. That's all." Then there was a blanket being straightened, and a small wet sigh from their daughter, and then only the hum the monitor made over a room gone quiet. Sungmin sat there with the pen in his hand, and he did not go upstairs. What he did instead was open a drawer in his husband's study. And by the time the sun came up, he had done something he would spend years trying to take back. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, back to the story. They met because Jinho set a building on fire, which was not how Jinho ever told it. He was 23, and he was making face oil in a rented room above a print shop. And he was doing it on a camping burner on the floor of a bathroom, because the room did not have a kitchen and the bathroom had a window. There were 3 of them living in that flat: Jinho, and a boy called Manseok who left the following year for a job at a bank, and Woojin, who was the only one of them who could cook, and the only one of them who ever cleaned anything, and who had a different name on his identity card, because he had been called Woojin since primary school by people who had never asked. The fire was not really a fire. It was a tea towel and a wall socket and a quantity of smoke that filled the stairwell and set off the alarm in the print shop below, and by the time the engine came, the tea towel was already in the bathtub under the cold tap. But somebody had called it in, so the crew came up the stairs anyway. And one of them, a probationary firefighter with wet hair and a face like a closed door, stood in the doorway of that bathroom and looked at a bathtub full of oil and a boy in a vest holding a smoking tea towel with a pair of chopsticks, and said, "You can't render fat in a bathroom." "It's not fat," Jinho said. "It's fat," said the firefighter. "It's rosehip. Rosehip fat," the firefighter said, and wrote something on a clipboard. And Jinho, who had not slept in days and had almost nothing in the world, fell in love standing on a bath mat. That was the story he told at company dinners for years afterwards, in the version where he was charming and the firefighter was handsome, and there was always a laugh in it. What he left out was the part where the crew went and the firefighter came back an hour later on his own, off shift, out of uniform, with a second-hand hot plate under his arm, and set it on the floor of the hallway and said, "Use this, not in the bathroom." And then he had stood there with nothing else prepared, and Woojin had said, from behind Jinho, "Do you want soup?" And he had said yes. Sungmin ate soup in that flat every week for a year before either of them said anything out loud. He was on shifts, and Jinho was awake at all hours, so they overlapped in bad weather and strange corners of the night, and Jinho would hand him a bowl and then go back to whatever he was stirring, and talk. He talked about the smell of the inside of a tangerine peel and how nobody had ever got it right in a bottle. He talked about his mother, who had cleaned rooms in a hotel and rationed one good hand cream and had not lived to see any of it. He talked so much that Sungmin, who had grown up in a house where 2 people could go whole days without speaking, started going back on days off, sitting on the floor against a radiator that did not work, for the specific pleasure of being talked at. He caught the scent properly for the first time on a night he came in soaked from a warehouse call. When Jinho crossed the room to take his coat and got close enough that his suppressants stopped being equal to the job, chilled ginger. Something sour and red underneath that Sungmin had no word for then and later learned was cherry. And under all of it, thin and shy, something like warm milk. He stood there with his coat half off and understood, in a way that was not romantic at all but purely physical and low down in him, that he was going to have a problem. They married the following spring at a district office with 2 witnesses off the street because Woojin was ill that day and Manseok had gone to Busan for an interview. Jinho wore a jacket he had borrowed. Sungmin's shoes were station issue. The bond came a month later, in a flat with a window that did not close, and afterwards Jinho had cried and then laughed and then made them both instant noodles at 4 a.m, and Sungmin had sat on the floor with the bowl on his knee and thought, without any drama in it at all, that this was the whole of his life now and that it was more than he had expected to get. The company was called Onda, and for years it was a bathtub and a hot plate and whoever Jinho could talk into helping. And then it was one product that a stranger with a camera liked. And then it was not that anymore. Money arrived slowly, and then all at once, and with lawyers attached. Jinho hired people. Jinho stopped sleeping in a way that was charming and started sleeping in a way that worried a doctor. They moved out of the flat above the print shop into somewhere with a lift, and then out of that into a house with a garden Jinho never once sat in. Sungmin stayed at the station, and he would not have said there was anything wrong with that. And if anyone had suggested there was, he would have gone very quiet and been unpleasant about it for a day. He liked the work. He was good at it. He made captain at 34, and it was the proudest week of his life. And he came home and told Jinho about it, and Jinho said congratulations and then took a call about a distribution contract in the middle of the sentence. That was not the thing that broke it. It was never one thing. It was 100 small transfers of weight, so slow that neither of them could point to the day the floor started sloping. Jinho stopped telling Sungmin about work, because when he did, Sungmin went quiet, and the quiet had a shape to it that Jinho learned to read as judgment. Sungmin stopped telling Jinho about work, because Jinho was carrying a great many people's wages and it seemed obscene to bring home a story about a bad night at a kitchen fire. So they both went silent out of consideration and then resented each other for the silence. And by the end, neither of them could have explained which had come first. The worst of it came the year before Ari. There was a fire in a building on the east side, an old one full of small businesses, and a floor came down while Sungmin's crew was inside, and he came out of it with a broken collarbone and a burn on his forearm the shape of a country nobody could name. He did not call. He told himself Jinho was in Singapore and there was nothing to be done and the phone call would only frighten him. And by the time Jinho landed, Sungmin was out of hospital and sitting up in the living room with his arms strapped. Jinho found out on a screen in an airport lounge. A local news clip, a captain, unnamed, carried out. He watched it again and again before he recognized the hand hanging down off the stretcher and the ring on it. He did not shout when he got home. That was the trouble. He stood in the doorway with his coat still on and looked at his husband strapped up on the sofa and said, "You didn't call me. There was nothing you could do." "That isn't what I asked." "You were away," Sungmin said. "What was I going to say? You could have said my name," Jinho said, and went upstairs. And on the other side of it, on Sungmin's side, there was the night Ari was born. It was a long one and a hard one, and Jinho was frightened out of his mind. And Sungmin held his hand through all of it and did not once say anything useful, because he had never had anything to say. And then at the end, in the quiet after, with their daughter a hot small weight in a blanket, Jinho's phone had gone and Jinho had taken it. A long time. A supplier had defaulted. Sungmin had stood at the window with his daughter against his chest, listening to his husband negotiate freight in the voice he used for men he intended to beat, and he did not say one word about it to Jinho, that night or ever. He never mentioned it. That was his particular talent. He could carry a thing for years without setting it down, and he could be so reasonable about it that the reasonableness was the punishment. Ari was not yet a year old the Sunday Jinho said it. They were in the kitchen. Sungmin was washing bottles. Jinho was standing with his hands spread on the island looking at the grain in the stone, and he said, "I think we should stop." "Jinho, case karagamening dog." Sungmin turned the tap off, and Jinho kept going. "I don't mean tonight. I mean I think we should stop pretending we're going to fix it," Jinho said. "I'm not happy. You're not happy. She's going to start noticing." He was using his bored voice, which was the only one he had left for getting through a hard sentence without stopping in the middle of it. "I'll have something drawn up. You won't have to do anything. It'll be fair." And Sungmin, standing at his own sink with his hands in warm water, said, "Okay." He said it fast. That was the part he thought about afterwards. He said it inside a second. The way you say okay when somebody offers to take your plate. And he watched Jinho's mouth close over whatever he had been going to say next, and then he turned the tap back on because he could not think of anything else to do with his hands. The papers came a few weeks later, and they were fair, and they were generous. And the generosity was unbearable. Jinho had given him the house. Jinho had given him a number that a man on a station wage would take a lifetime to earn, and it was still nothing against the company. And both of them knew it, and neither of them said it. And in the section on their daughter, in language a lawyer had smoothed until it was almost kind, Jinho had asked for 2 weekends in the month, and given Sungmin everything else. Sungmin read that clause over and over, and he did not understand it. Whatever else was true about his husband, Jinho loved that baby with a completeness that had surprised everybody, including Jinho. And a man like that did not hand over his daughter in a paragraph. Sungmin had sat with it for days and had almost, twice, walked into the study to ask. He did not ask. And that is where he was, on a Tuesday night with the house quiet and a pen in his hand, when the monitor crackled and his husband's voice came down the stairs the long way round. "You're going to stay here with your dad. He's better at this than me. When I'm not here anymore, I just want you to know I was here." Sungmin sat there for a long time after the room above went quiet. Then he got up, and instead of climbing the stairs, he walked down the hall to the study, and he opened the drawer of the desk his husband almost never used, and he found the folder. It was a plain, gray document wallet with an elastic band round it, and inside it were letters from a hospital on the other side of the river, printed on the thin paper hospitals use. There was a ward number at the foot of every page and a patient name at the top of every one, and the name was not his husband's. It was nobody Sungmin had ever heard of. He looked at that name and then he understood it, or thought he did. Jinho had used other names for years. He used them for restaurant bookings and hotel registers, and the 2 occasions a magazine had gone after him, and it had never once occurred to him to explain it, because to Jinho it was what you did when your face was on a shelf in every chemist in the country. Of course he had registered under something else, and there was no envelope with the letters either, which Sungmin took to mean his husband had not wanted them coming to the house. He would deal with the name later, he told himself. There would be a form for it. There is a form for everything, and a husband can sign one, and an ex-husband cannot. Underneath the letters, there was a paper bag from a hospital pharmacy, empty, and a printed list of treatment options, with prices beside them, and somebody had gone down the right-hand column with a pen and totaled it at the bottom, and the total was the sort of number that only appeared in Jinho's life on paper. Sungmin put the folder back exactly as he had found it. Then he sat down in the chair and woke his husband's laptop, and it did not ask him for a password, because it never had. He was not proud of the next part. The search history went back weeks. How long does someone usually have? What happens in the last months? Is it painful at the end? Second opinion. Is it worth it? And then, near the top of it, only a few days old, a search that stopped his breath in his chest, because it was not a search a person makes about somebody else. How do I tell the people I love? Sungmin closed the laptop and sat in the dark. He was 36 years old. He had gone into buildings that other people were running out of. He had once carried a man twice his weight down flight after flight with a ceiling coming apart above him, and he had done it without any particular feeling about it, because at work, his hands always knew what to do before he did. And he sat in that chair and his hands did not know anything at all. The thing he should have done was obvious, and it stayed obvious. He should have gone up those stairs. He should have opened the nursery door and said, "Tell me, whatever it is. Say it out loud to me, and not to the baby." But he had spent 2 years learning that his husband did not want to be asked, and asking now would mean admitting he had been standing at the bottom of the stairs listening to something private, and underneath both of those there was a third thing, uglier and simpler, which was that Sungmin was afraid. If he asked and Jinho said the word out loud, then it would be a real thing in the world with a name, and everything after that would be a countdown. So he did not go up. He sat in the study until the sky went gray, and at some point in that long stretch, his mind, which had never in its life stopped being practical, began to do a thing he did not authorize it to do. He did not know the law, and he did not go and look it up properly, then or afterwards, and he has never pretended otherwise. What he believed, sitting in that chair, was the thing anybody believes. A husband is in the room. An ex-husband is telephoned later, if somebody remembers. Signing would not touch the bond, and he knew that much, because nothing touches the bond. Signing would touch the forms, and it is the forms that decide who stands next to the bed and who stands out in the corridor being spoken to kindly by a stranger with a clipboard. If he signed on Friday, he would hear about it in a message. He would hear about the end of it from the news, which is how Jinho had heard about the collarbone. And if he did not sign, He was still a husband when it happened, and everything that had ever come out of that bathtub came to him. There was a hard-backed station notebook on the shelf with the manuals, one he had brought home months ago and never used. Sungmin took it down, opened it at the back page, and wrote it all down. He wrote the 2 columns. He wrote what each one came to. He was very neat about it, because he was neat about everything. And at the bottom of the right-hand column, he wrote a figure and then sat looking at it in his own handwriting until his eyes hurt. Then he closed the notebook and put it back where it lived, and went and stood in the kitchen and tore his half of the separation agreement in 2. Jinho came down early with Ari on his hip and his hair flat on one side, and stopped in the doorway when he saw Sungmin still in yesterday's clothes. "Have you been up all night?" "I'm not signing it," Sungmin said. Jinho stood very still, and Ari grabbed a fistful of his collar and pulled it sideways, and neither of them corrected her. "What?" "The agreement." Sungmin put the 2 halves on the counter, side by side, the tear running through his own unfinished name. "I'm not signing it." "Sungmin," we agreed. "I've changed my mind." Jinho set the baby down in the high chair very slowly, using both hands for it. And when he straightened up, his voice had gone flat and careful, and he was looking at the wall behind Sungmin's head. "You said okay," Jinho said. "You said okay in about half a second. I have thought about that half second more than I have thought about almost anything. So don't stand in my kitchen and tell me you've changed your mind." "I know what I said." "Then what is this?" And Sungmin, who had lain awake all night assembling reasons, discovered that not one of them could be said out loud. He could not say, "I heard you on the monitor." He could not say, "I opened your drawer." He could not say, "How long?" And he absolutely could not say the true and disgraceful thing, which was that he had sat in a chair in the dark and done sums. So he said, "I don't want to. That is not a reason. It's the only one I've got." Jinho looked at him for a long moment. He looked tired in a way that had stopped being about sleep some time ago. He was thinner than he had been in the spring, and there was a gray cast under his eyes that no amount of the products he sold had ever managed to do anything about. And Sungmin catalogued all of it now with a horrible new attention. The way you notice a crack in a wall the day after somebody tells you the wall is coming down. "Fine," Jinho said at last. "Have your reason. I'll tell the lawyers there's a delay." "How long a delay? How long do you want?" "I don't know yet," Sungmin said. Jinho picked up his coffee, and Sungmin watched him drink it, and thought about a folder in a drawer and a number at the bottom of a column, and said, out of nowhere, "You should eat something." Jinho's cup stopped halfway down. "What?" "Before you go, you should eat something." There was a silence in that kitchen of a quality neither of them had experienced in about 2 years, and then Jinho said, slowly, "Are you unwell?" "No." "Because you've just told me you're not divorcing me and then instructed me to eat toast, and I have a meeting at 8. So I need to know if I should be worried." "Eat the toast," Sungmin said, and put a slice in. What followed was, by any measure, the strangest stretch of Jinho's adult life. It started with the coffee, the next morning, in front of the woman who looked after Ari. Sungmin took the cup out of his hand and poured it down the sink and said, "You've had 3. And made him something hot and beige that tasted like a wet field. The day after that, there was a humidifier in the bedroom that nobody had bought. Then Sungmin swapped a night shift with a man who owed him nothing. Came home at an hour he had not come home at in years, and cooked. Jinho stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and watched his husband make soup with the same expression he would have worn watching him assemble a bomb. "What are you doing?" "Making dinner." "You don't cook." "I cook badly," Sungmin said. "It's not the same thing." By the end of the week there was a bag of vitamins on the counter with a note that said, "With food not on empty," in capital letters, and the note was in handwriting Jinho had seen on birthday cards, and on exactly nothing else in their whole marriage. He asked Il-seung to look into it. Il-seung had been his chief of staff since the company was a handful of people, and he guarded Jinho with total commitment and no sense of proportion. He came back the next day and said the most alarming words available. "There's nothing. He's just at home." "He's never just at home. He's swapped shifts. I don't know how many, they won't tell me, and I did try." Il-seung consulted his phone with visible reluctance. "The house says he's been cooking, and that he asked her how to steam things. He also called somebody about the boiler and told them you feel the cold. I'm not sensitive to cold. I know. Jinho spent that weekend waiting for the other thing. Because there is always another thing. And in his experience, kindness that arrives suddenly is a receipt for something. So he watched his husband with the attention he gave to men across tables, and what he saw made no sense. Because Sungmin was not performing. Sungmin was terrible at it. He hovered. He asked twice about a cough. He sat on the arm of the sofa on Sunday with Ari asleep on his chest and said, apparently to the television, "You should have a proper checkup." And Jinho said, "I have one every year. It's in the diary." And Sungmin said, "Right," in the voice of a man who has had a door shut in his face. He was ashamed of the next part later. At the time, he did not have the strength to be. He liked it. And he liked it so much that it frightened him. He had been in rooms all week where everybody wanted something from him, and then he came home and a man put a bowl in front of him and told him to eat it. It had been so long since anybody had made a decision about his body on his behalf that his own instincts, which he had kept on a short lead since the company got big, came straight up out of the floor of him. The first time he really felt it was in the car. There was an evening thing, a launch. One of those events where he stood under lights and people photographed him next to a bottle. He had told Sungmin about it out of habit and had not expected anything, and then Sungmin turned up at the house in a shirt Jinho had bought him years ago and said, "I'll drive you. I have a driver." "I know." So they drove. And in the car park under the building, with the engine off and the noise of the event coming faintly through concrete, Jinho reached for the door, and Sungmin said, "Wait." He leaned over. He put 2 fingers under Jinho's chin and turned his face. And Jinho stopped breathing out. "Your collar's inside out," Sungmin said. He fixed it, and he was slow about it. His knuckles brushed the side of Jinho's throat, low down, where the gland sat under the skin, and he took longer over it than a collar needs. Jinho heard himself make a sound that was not a word. The inside of that car filled up with wet wool and cold rain on brick, the way it used to when Sungmin came in off a night shift with the weather still on him, and underneath it, so faint that Jinho would have missed it if he had not spent his professional life training his nose. There was something dark and warm, cocoa left in the bottom of a cup, and that note had only ever appeared for one person in the world. "There," Sungmin said, and took his hand back. Jinho did not move, and Sungmin let him not move. "Do you want to go in?" he said. "No." "Then, don't." "I have to." "You don't have to," Sungmin said. "You could sit here. I'd sit here." Jinho got out of the car, because he was who he was, and he stood in front of a wall of photographers with his ears burning and his own scent doing something under his suppressants that he could smell even if nobody else could, and he did not hear a single question anyone asked him. Sungmin stood at the back of the room for the whole thing with his hands behind him, and at one point a bored investor called Doyun put a hand on Jinho's lower back to move him towards a camera, and the hand stayed there a beat past useful, and Doyun said something into his ear about how thin he was looking and how he ought to let people take care of him. Jinho felt the room change temperature before he understood why. When he turned, Sungmin was there, 1 pace off Doyun's shoulder, not touching anybody, saying in an entirely pleasant voice, "You'll want to move your hand." "I'm sorry," Doyun said, smiling. "And you are." "I'm his husband." "Ah, the fireman." "That's right," Sungmin said, and did not say anything else, and the total absence of anything else made Doyun's smile stop reaching his eyes before he took his hand off Jinho's back and went to find a drink. In the car going home, Jinho said, "You were rude." "I was polite." "You were extremely rude in a polite voice, which is worse, and he's on my board. He's got a hand problem. He's got 4%. He can have 4%, Sungmin said, "and keep his hands off you." And Jinho turned his face to the window so his husband would not see what his mouth was doing. At the station, Junsu started on him soon enough. Because Junsu noticed everything and had no filter of any kind. "You've swapped 6 shifts. You've been at this station as long as I have, and you've never once had things on." He put his boots up on the bench. "You've stopped complaining, as well. Are you dying?" "No." "Is he dying?" Sungmin, who had never in his life been able to lie convincingly, and had therefore learned simply not to answer, went to check the cylinders, and Junsu, who was a beta and could not smell a thing, watched him the whole way across the bay and did not ask him anything else for a month. The trouble was that Sungmin could not find anything out. He tried. He rang the hospital on the other side of the river and asked, without giving any name, what a husband was entitled to be told, and a woman explained the rules to him kindly and completely, and he put the phone down and sat in the engine bay with his hands on his knees. He copied the ward number off the letters. He looked up what that ward treated and then wished for the rest of the day that he had not, and he watched his husband, which was the worst part. Because once he started watching, everything he saw fit. Jinho left the table more than once in a week without finishing. Jinho fell asleep on the sofa in the early evening with his shoes on, which he had never done. Not once. Not in the years above the print shop when he was working 3 jobs. Jinho went out on Thursday nights and came back late smelling of the inside of a building, disinfectant and floor polish and other people's illness. And when Sungmin asked where he had been, Jinho said, "Work," and did not look at him. Once, only once, Sungmin followed him. He sat in his own car up the road from the hospital on the other side of the river and watched his husband get out of a taxi and go in through the main doors, carrying a paper bag with a flask in it, and he sat there with both hands on the wheel and did not go in after him. He told himself it was because he had no right. What it actually was, and he knew it even then, was that he could not make himself walk through a door and be told how much time his husband had left. He drove home and put his daughter to bed and stood in the nursery in the dark for a long while afterwards. Then he got the notebook down off the shelf with the manuals. He turned past the back page, where the 2 columns were, and opened it at the front. And he sat at the kitchen table and wrote, at the top, in the flat capitals he used on incident logs, "Things for Ari." Then he wrote for most of the night. He wrote that her papa could tell what was in a bottle from across a room and had once identified a hand cream at a bus stop. He wrote that he sang badly and only in the shower, and only songs from before either of them was born. He wrote down the story of the tea towel and the bathtub, and the sentence about rosehip fat. And he wrote, because he was being accurate, that Jinho had told that story so many times that Sungmin was no longer certain which parts had actually happened. He wrote that when Jinho laughed properly, he did it with no sound at all for the first second. He wrote what he smelled like. He worked on that paragraph the longest and was still not satisfied with it. And in the end he put, ginger, cold, like when you cut into it, elderflower, something sour, like a cherry that isn't ready. And underneath all of it, if he lets you close enough, warm milk. Nobody else gets the last one. Don't let anybody tell you they did. He wrote until his hand hurt, and then he left the notebook open on the kitchen island, because he had never in his life had to hide anything in his own house, and went up to bed. Jinho found it in the small hours. He had come down for water. He was not sleeping much by then, for reasons that had nothing to do with what his husband believed. And he saw a station notebook lying open on the kitchen island, and glanced at it without much interest, expecting an equipment list. He read all of the front of it standing up in the dark with a glass in his hand. Fairly quickly he put the glass down, and after that he sat on the floor with his back against the dishwasher, which is not a thing that men who are photographed next to bottles generally do. And he read about the bus stop and the hand cream, and how his own laugh worked. And he got to ginger, cold, like when you cut into it. And he made a sound in the dark of his own kitchen that he would have been mortified for anybody to hear. Nobody else gets the last one. He had spent 2 years believing that his husband had stopped seeing him, and out of 2 years of silences, he had built a complete and airtight case, and every clause of it was wrong, and the notebook said what he smelled like, for a baby who could not read, in case she ever needed it. He did not think about why. That is the thing he would come back to 100 times afterwards, hunting for the moment he could have caught it, and the honest answer is that there was nothing on those pages to catch. Whatever there was to find was on a page he had no reason on earth to turn to. He was sitting on a kitchen floor in the middle of the night being loved, and he did not interrogate it. He went upstairs and got into bed on the side he had not slept on in months. And Sungmin, who had been lying awake, went very tense, and then very carefully did not move. "Are you awake?" "Yes, I read your notebook." Sungmin's breathing changed. In the dark, Jinho felt the mattress shift, and then stop shifting. It was on the table, Jinho said. I know where I left it. Why are you writing it? There was a silence long enough for Jinho to hear the humidifier that nobody had bought. So she'll know, Sungmin said. She'll know. She's going to have me for the next 40 years. She can just ask me. People forget, Sungmin said. People forget everything. I can't remember what my father's hands looked like. He said it in his flat voice. And then, much lower, I wanted it written down. I wanted it written down. I wanted it written down. He said it in that one. Jinho turned onto his side. Their faces were close enough that scent stopped being something either of them could manage. Jinho's suppressants had been slipping for weeks, and he had told himself that was the tiredness. And now, with his husband a hand's width away in the dark, the sour red note came up out of him and then the sweet one underneath it, and everything in Sungmin registered it like a hand closing. Sungmin. Yes. Touch me. Jinho. You've been circling me for a month, Jinho said. You've been folding my collars and putting things in my food and standing behind me at parties and telling investors to move their hands, and if you don't touch me tonight I am going to lose my mind. So, Sungmin put his hand on him, and it was not smooth. Nothing about it was smooth. And that was the mercy of it. Because they had been smooth with each other for 2 years, and it had been the coldest thing in the world. Sungmin's palm went flat on Jinho's ribs, over the shirt, and then under it, and Jinho made a sound and got a fist in the front of his husband's t-shirt and pulled, and their mouths met badly, off-center, teeth involved, before they got it right, and then it got right very fast. Jinho had forgotten what the weight of him was like. He had forgotten the specific thing Sungmin did with his hand at the back of his skull, holding him still, not hard, just so that he could not turn his face away, and he had forgotten what it did to him to be held still like that by somebody strong enough to mean it. He got his leg over Sungmin's hip, and Sungmin's hand came down and gripped him there and held on. And the sound Sungmin made then came low out of his chest and broke in the middle, and Jinho felt it against his mouth and answered it with his whole spine. Say something, Jinho said, against his jaw. Say anything. I can't stand it when you're quiet. I don't have anything to say. You wrote pages of it. Different hands, Sungmin said, and Jinho laughed into his shoulder and then stopped laughing, because Sungmin's mouth had found the gland at the side of his throat and put itself there, open and hot, and his knees stopped being reliable. It had been a very long time since anybody had touched him there. His scent came up off him all at once, chilled ginger, elderflower, the sour red note going soft and dark and ripe, and the milk note flooding through it. And Sungmin's scent came up to meet it. Wool and rain and cocoa, and the two of them together made a third thing, as they always had, the thing Jinho had never once been able to reproduce in a lab and had privately hated himself for failing at. It was rain hitting a fire that had just gone out, wet ash and steam and something sweet in it. He had tried it over and over in the workshop and thrown all of it away. That's it, he said, out loud, without meaning to. That's the one. What? Nothing. Don't stop. Sungmin's teeth grazed the gland, and Jinho's hands went into his hair and pulled, and the bond, which had been lying at the bottom of both of them for 2 years doing nothing, woke up, and they both felt it, and neither of them said anything about it. And afterwards, Jinho lay with his face against his husband's shoulder and slept for the first time in weeks like something switched off. Sungmin did not sleep. He lay in the dark with a warm weight against his side and his hand in his husband's hair, and he understood, with the total clarity that only ever arrives at the wrong time, 2 things. The first was that he no longer wanted the money. He tried it out deliberately, the way you press a bruise. He thought about the shares and the company and the number at the bottom of that column, and it had gone completely flat. It had no charge in it at all, and what was in its place was a horror so large he had to lie very still under it. He did not want the company. He wanted this. He wanted 1,000 more Tuesdays of exactly this. And there was a folder in a drawer down the hall that said he was not going to get them. And the second thing was worse. And it came straight in, on the back of the first. He could never tell him. Not ever. And not one word of it. Because the moment he explained why he had stopped signing, he would have to explain the notebook, and the notebook had a back page. He got up for it twice in the weeks after that, once in the small hours and once on a Sunday with the house full of noise, and both times he put the book back on the shelf without touching the page. Tearing it out would have been the first thing he had done on purpose since that Tuesday, and he was not ready to be a man who had done any of it on purpose. The weeks after that were the best weeks of Jinho's life, and he has never been able to say so without something in his throat closing because of what they were made of. Sungmin moved his shifts around like a man rearranging furniture. He turned up at the office at lunchtime with food in a bag and sat on the corner of a table in a room full of people who had never seen him before, and Il-sung went out into the corridor and looked at a wall for a while. He learned the name of Jinho's assistant and the name of Jinho's assistant's dog. He came home one night and found Jinho asleep at the kitchen island with a laptop open and a formulation sheet stuck to his cheek. And he did not wake him. He picked him up, and Jinho came round halfway up the stairs and said, without opening his eyes, "You'll do your back." And Sungmin said, "I'm carrying you, not a wardrobe." They started talking again, which was harder than the other thing and took longer. It came in pieces at odd hours. Jinho told him about a supplier who had been stealing from him for a year and how much it had hurt, not the money, the fact that he had liked the man. Sungmin told him about the East Side building. All of it. The floor and the noise and the fact that for a few seconds he had been certain and had thought about nothing at all. Not Jinho, not anybody, which was the part he had never been able to say out loud because he was ashamed of it. "That's not shameful," Jinho said. "I thought I'd have a last thought about you. You had a floor coming down on you. Still." "Sungmin," Jinho said, and stopped, and then, because it was late and dark and he was braver in the dark, "You're allowed to just be a person." And Sungmin lay there and let that go into him, and thought, with the folder always somewhere at the back of everything now, that he had left it far too late to be a person. There was a morning near the end of that stretch when Sungmin came in off a night shift with the weather and the work still on him, boots in the hall, and found his husband already at the island in nothing but a shirt, with a laptop open and a mug going cold beside him. "You're early," Sungmin said. "You're late." "I'm on time. You're early." He went past him towards the stairs, and Jinho's hand came out and caught his wrist and stopped him. "You smell like a fire. That's usually a bad sign in a husband." "It isn't," Jinho said, and did not let go. Sungmin looked down at the hand on his wrist. Then he took it off, carefully, and put it back on the stone, and said, "I'm filthy. Give me 10 minutes, and went up. Jinho did not wait that long. He came into the bathroom while the water was still running and shut the door behind him and got in with his shirt on, which he would maintain for years afterwards was an accident of enthusiasm and not a plan. Sungmin turned round with soap on his forearms and said his name in a voice that was not an objection. The shirt went dark and stuck to him at once. And it was worse than nothing. It was worse in every possible respect, and Sungmin got his hands on him through it, at the ribs and then at the small of his back, and Jinho got up on his toes and put his open mouth on his husband's collarbone where the water was coming off it. "You'll ruin that," Sungmin said. "I own the company. That's not the point. I make things for skin. I know what water does. Be quiet." He got a fistful of the back of Sungmin's hair, and Sungmin's arm came round behind him and lifted, and Jinho's shoulder blades met tile cold enough to make him swear and then not cold at all. Somewhere in the middle of it the shirt came off and went over the side of the bath in a wet rope. Sungmin's mouth went from his mouth to his throat, to the soft place under his ear, and then lower, to the gland, and Jinho's knee came up and every complaint he had about that tile stopped mattering to either of them. The water had gone cold before they were finished with it. Afterward, Jinho sat on the closed lid in a towel with his hair flat to his skull and watched his husband shave, and said, "You have to be at the station at 3. "I know. Don't go." "I'm going." "I know you're going," Jinho said. "I'm saying it out loud. You told me I was allowed to say things out loud." Sungmin put the razor down. He came over and put his hand on the back of Jinho's wet head and held it there against his stomach for a moment without saying anything at all, and Jinho shut his eyes, and then he went to the station. He began to do arithmetic of a different kind. Not the columns. He caught himself counting anyway, without any number to count with, which is the worst way to do it. He would look at his husband across a room and think, next spring, and then take the thought out and put it down like something hot. Jinho's heat came back at the end of the month. It had not come since Ari. And he had been on suppressants the whole time, and they had been losing to him for weeks, and the doctor had told him plainly that sooner or later they would stop holding, and that when they did, he should come off them and let it happen. He knew a day ahead of it. He always did. He came out of a meeting in the middle of the afternoon and stood in the corridor with one hand on the wall, and Il-sung said, "Shall I clear the week?" And Jinho said, "Clear the week," and got in a taxi. He rang Sungmin from the back of it and got as far as saying his name. "I'm coming," Sungmin said. "You're on shift until..." "I'm coming." He was there before Jinho had got the bedroom windows shut. He came in the front door and stopped in the hall, and Jinho, at the top of the stairs, watched his husband lose, which was not a thing he had ever seen him do. Everything in that house smelled of Jinho by then. Preheat is not subtle, and Jinho had never been subtle to begin with, and Sungmin got as far as the bottom of the stairs and stopped there with one hand on the newel post. He had left his boots in the doorway, and he did not remember doing it. "Ari's at your mother's," Jinho said. "Right. I sent Il-seung home." "Right. Sungmin, please come here." He came there, and it was not the frantic thing it had been when they were young. It was slower and it was worse, and it went on for days, and what Jinho remembered afterwards was the hands. Sungmin's hands were the whole of it. There was a stretch in the middle of the second night when Jinho could not have said what room he was in, and his husband was behind him with an arm across his chest, holding on and not letting go of anything, saying his name into the back of his neck over and over. And Jinho, who ran a company, who negotiated freight, who had once made a grown man cry over a shipping schedule, came apart in that bed with somebody's palm flat over his heart and did not think about the company one time. There was water put in his hand. There was a cold cloth at the back of his neck. There was a moment, near the end, when the fever broke and left him wrung out and shaking, and Sungmin sat him up against his chest and fed him rice with a spoon, badly, dropping half of it, and Jinho started laughing and could not stop, and then was crying instead. And Sungmin put his chin on the top of his head and said nothing at all, and just held on. And somewhere in the middle of it, in the fog, Jinho said something with his face in his husband's shoulder that he did not remember saying. "I can't lose him too." Sungmin's hand did not stop moving on his back. He did not stop and he did not ask, because Jinho was not conscious in any useful sense, and because his own chest had gone tight. And he sat there in the dark holding his husband through the last of it, and he did not ask him what he meant, because he thought he already knew. He put it away, the way he put everything away. The bond was fully awake after that week, and neither of them mentioned it, though they both felt each other now the way you feel weather in a joint. Jinho, in a meeting, would stop mid-sentence and know that somewhere across the city his husband had gone into a building. Sungmin, at the station, would put down a hose fitting because a wave of something not his own had just come through him, and would text one word and get one word back. He never asked about Thursdays. That was the discipline he set himself, and he had decided, and once he decided a thing it stayed decided, that if Jinho wanted to spend Thursday nights at a hospital on the other side of the river not telling his husband about it, then Jinho was entitled to that, and Sungmin's job was to have the bath running when he got in. So he did. Every Thursday. Bath, hot food, no questions. And Jinho would come through the door gray to the lips and find a man in his kitchen who did not ask, and mistake it for tact. It broke on a Tuesday in the middle of the night. Jinho's phone went at an hour when phones only ever bring one kind of news. Sungmin woke to the light of it and to his husband already standing, already pulling clothes on, saying yes into it, and yes, and I'm coming now. And then Jinho was gone down the stairs with one shoe in his hand and the front door open behind him. He did not come back for 2 days. He sent messages. "Work emergency. Sorry. Don't wait up. Kiss her for me." And Sungmin stood in his own hallway on the second night with his phone in his hand and read them again, and thought about the words "work emergency," and about a folder in a drawer, and about a fever a few weeks earlier and a voice saying, "I can't lose him too," and he put the phone in his pocket and went and got his keys. He rang his mother about Ari. He got in the car. He drove to the hospital on the other side of the river, and he parked badly, and he walked in through the main doors, and he did not ask anybody anything, because he did not need to. He had the ward number off those letters, and he had been walking into buildings for a living since he was 27. And at that hour, nobody stops a man in a coat who goes past the desk like he knows where he is going. He stood in the lift with his hands at his sides and a stranger's name in his head, and he watched the numbers. And he understood that Ward 11 was the ward he had looked up months ago and wished he had not. He came out on the 3rd floor into a corridor with the lights half down for the night. And he did not need a room number in the end, because a door along on the left was ajar with a lamp on inside, and coming out of it, low and steady, was his husband's voice reading something aloud. He walked down there, and every step of it he was certain. He had already seen what was on the other side of the door. He put his palm on the door and pushed it open. Jinho was in a chair, pulled up close to the bed with a paperback in his hands. And in the bed there was a man Sungmin had not seen in years. He was bald and he was very thin, and there was a line taped to the back of his hand. And it took Sungmin a full second to place him, and then it took no time at all, because the man in the bed turned his head and gave him a look of pure exasperation and said, in a voice like a paper bag, "Oh, good. The fireman." It was Woojin, who had made soup in a flat above a print shop and had said, "Do you want soup?" on the first night, and who had told Sungmin to take his boots off in the hall every single time for a year, and whose sofa Sungmin had carried up 3 flights of stairs one August, with the sweat running into his eyes while Woojin stood on the landing telling him which way to turn it. Sungmin did not move. Jinho had come up out of the chair and the paperback was on the floor. "You followed me," Jinho said. "You've been gone 2 days. You followed me here. You've been gone 2 days, Jinho. Would you both shut up?" Woojin said. "I've had a bad week." Nobody shut up, but nobody said anything either. And the machine beside the bed made the small sounds machines make. And Jinho stood there with his hands loose at his sides, looking for the first time since Sungmin had known him like a man caught out being kind. "He didn't want anyone to know," Jinho said finally. "He made me promise. He's got nobody. Sungmin. His mother's dead and his brother's in Canada and hasn't answered a message in 4 years. And when he got the diagnosis, he came to my office and asked me for money and told me if I told a living soul he'd stop taking my calls, and I have kept that promise for a year." He looked at the bed, and he's the last person alive who knew me before any of it. My mother's gone. There's him. His voice cracked in the middle of the word year, and he stopped and started again. "I have kept it while you looked at me like I was having an affair. I know what you thought. I could feel you thinking it." "I didn't think that," Sungmin said. "You did. Not for a while," Sungmin said. And it was the worst thing he could have said. And he watched Jinho hear it and file it and put it somewhere for later. "Then what did you think?" Sungmin stood in the door of a hospital room with his husband in front of him and a dying friend in the bed, and the answer sitting right there in his mouth, and every single thing that came afterwards hung off what he did with it. "I thought you were ill," he said. Jinho stared at him. "You were tired all the time. You'd stopped eating. There was a folder in your desk with letters in it and a ward number at the bottom of them." Sungmin's hands had come up, and he did not know what to do with them, and he put them down. "There was a name on them that wasn't yours. I thought you'd registered under something else. You do that for everything. You did it for the place with the fish." Jinho put his hand over his own mouth. "And there were things on your laptop," Sungmin said, "about how long somebody has, and one about how you tell the people you love." He stopped, and then he said the last of it. "And in the week you couldn't stand up, you said into my shoulder that you couldn't lose him too. You said him. I thought you'd got it wrong because of the fever." "That one was mine," Woojin said from the bed. "I made him look it up. I wanted to know how you tell a brother who hasn't answered you in 4 years, and neither of us could work it out, so we didn't." He shifted on the good pillows. "And the name on the letters is mine as well. It's what's on my card. Nobody has called me that since I was about 11, and I'd rather they didn't start." He closed his eyes. "Oh, you idiot." And Jinho's whole face opened, which was worse than anything else could have been, because he did not go cold and he did not go angry. He came across that room and took his husband's face in both hands and said, "You thought I was dying?" And then, before Sungmin could answer, "For how long? Since when?" And Sungmin looked at him and saw exactly where the question was going, and lied. "A few days," he said. "This week." Sungmin. This week. All right, Jinho said, and kissed his forehead, and held him there. And Sungmin stood in that hospital doorway with his husband's hands on his face and his eyes open over his shoulder, and knew that he had just bought himself the rest of his life and paid for it with the only thing he had. Woojin, it turned out, wanted very little. He wanted the good pillows and a particular brand of barley tea, and for nobody to make a fuss. He also wanted to be extremely rude to Sungmin, which he did with an energy that alarmed the nursing staff. He carried my sofa, he told a nurse. He carried my sofa and he complained about it for 9 years. I never mentioned it once. You radiated it. Sungmin started going. He took the Wednesday nights, because Jinho had the Thursdays, and he sat in that room with a paper cup of tea and talked about nothing. And Woojin, who had grown up in a house even quieter than Sungmin's, seemed to find that restful. And for a little while that was their life, and it was good. It was so good that Sungmin let himself stop thinking about the notebook. It was raining the evening Jinho took it off the shelf. He was looking for something to write in. That was all. He had come home early for once, and Ari was on the rug with a plastic ring in her mouth, and Jinho had had an idea in the car about a name for something and wanted to put it down before it went, and somebody had put the station notebook back on the shelf with the manuals, which meant Sungmin had. And Jinho knew what was in the front of it, and he thought, with a small, private warmth, that he would write his idea in the back so as not to interrupt it. He opened it at the back page. There were 2 columns in his husband's handwriting, ruled with the edge of a card. On the left it said, Sig, and under that, in a short list, house, the figure, her, and then, set apart from those, in the same hand, out of the room, told afterwards by somebody else. On the right it said don't, and that column was itemized the way a man itemizes a job. Next of kin. In the room. Next of kin. And then the shareholding, and the company by name, and under all of it, ruled off. A figure with the whole of it added up, and in the corner of the page, because Sungmin dated everything he ever wrote, was a date. Jinho stood in his living room with his daughter chewing plastic at his feet and looked at that date, and did the only sum that mattered, which took him no time at all, because he had gone over that week more times than he could account for. It was the night before Sungmin said, I'm not signing it. A few days, Sungmin had told him. In that hospital room, with Woojin lying 2 feet away. This week, Jinho looked at the front of the notebook and read the first page again with the date on the last one in his head, and it was not a father writing down his family. It was an inventory. Jinho sat down on the arm of the sofa. He was aware of being extremely calm, which frightened him more than anything else in the room, and he sat there through the evening news, and through Ari getting bored of the plastic ring and beginning to complain, and he picked her up and fed her and put her down for the night with his hands doing all the right things and nothing behind them at all. Sungmin came in after dark. He put his bag down in the hall and said something about the traffic, and came into the living room, and Jinho was sitting in the middle of the sofa with the notebook closed on his knees. Sungmin saw it and stopped in the doorway. How long? Jinho said. Jinho, you said a few days. In that room with him lying there, you looked at me and you said a few days. How long? There was no version of it that was not the truth, so Sungmin gave him the truth, standing up, in his work trousers, in the middle of his own living room. Since the night you told her she was staying here with me. Jinho closed his eyes. The monitor was on, Sungmin said. I was at the table with the papers in front of me. I heard you say when I'm not here anymore. And I heard you say I just want you to know I was here. And I sat there. And then I went and opened your desk. And then you did sums. Yes. On the back of the book you were writing about me in. Yes. Jinho opened his eyes and looked at him, and Sungmin would have preferred almost anything to what was in his face, which was not rage. Say it out loud, Jinho said. The whole thing. Say it so I know I've understood. Jinho, don't. Say it. I thought you were dying, Sungmin said, and I worked out that if I signed I'd be nobody, I'd be a man somebody rings on the Tuesday to say it happened on the Sunday, and if I stayed married to you I'd be in the room, and I'd get the lot. And that's the night I stopped signing. The room was very quiet, and then Jinho said, and the soup, that wasn't. The collar in the car, the vitamins with the note in capitals, telling Doyun to move his hand. carrying me up the stairs. He was going down the list steadily, in his meeting voice. And each item landed somewhere in Sungmin's chest and stuck. The week I couldn't stand up. You in that bed with your hand on my heart. That was real. It started on the Wednesday, Sungmin. Everything started on the Wednesday. Jinho's voice went at last, and he let it. There isn't one single thing you've done for me in 3 months that I can keep. Not one. I've been going through my own life, picking things up and putting them down again for 2 hours, and I can't keep any of it, because it all has that date on it. That's not. Do you know what I thought I was? Jinho said. I thought I was loved. That's what I've been walking round thinking. I have been in rooms this month feeling sorry for people because they don't have what I've got. Sungmin took a step forward and Jinho put a hand up, and he stopped. You heard me, Jinho said. That's the thing. Not the money. I could probably survive the money. I've been valued my whole life. I'm used to being a number in somebody's column. I don't even mind it. That's how bad it's got. He stood up. You heard me on that floor. You heard me say the worst thing I have ever said out loud, and then you sat at that table and let me put her down and go to bed on my own with it, and you never asked. You went and looked in a drawer instead. You had 3 months to say one sentence to me, and you spent them making soup. He put the notebook down on the coffee table. Squarely. The way you return something to a shop. I'd rather you'd hit me, he said. He took Ari to the flat above the print shop that night. He still owned it. He had never been able to sell it, and it had a bed in it, and a hot plate that was not the original one, and he sat on the floor of that room in the middle of the night, with his daughter asleep in a travel cot, and his back against a radiator that had never worked, in the exact spot where a probationary firefighter used to sit with a bowl on his knee. The first days were the ones Sungmin had expected, which meant he got through them. He went to work, and he did not tell Junsu, and Junsu did not ask, because Junsu had looked at him once across the engine bay and decided against it. He came home to a house built for a family and containing 1 man. He put the bottles in the sterilizer out of habit and then took them out again. And he stripped the bed and could not make himself put the sheets in the machine, and left them in a pile on the utility room floor for days, because putting them in the machine would have been the end of something. It was the 2nd week that took him apart. Bonded pairs are not built to be in separate buildings, and theirs had only just woken up. And it came at him sideways and at bad hours. He would be checking a hydrant and his chest would go tight for no reason, and he would know, with a certainty that had nothing to do with thinking, that somewhere across the city his husband had just sat down on a floor. His scent went strange enough that one of the alphas on his shift asked him, carefully, whether he was going into rut. And Sungmin said no, and went, and stood out in the yard in the rain. Junsu found him out in the yard on a bad night, and stood next to him for a while and then said, You did something. Yes, right. Junsu looked at the sky. My brother did something. Took him 2 years to go and say it properly, and by then she'd married a dentist. He put his hands in his pockets. You've got a bit of time. Not as much as you think. He doesn't want to see me. I know. I'm not saying go round there. Junsu started back towards the doors. I'm saying don't settle into it. On Jinho's side of the city, it was no better, and he had less room to hide it. He worked, because work was the only machine he had ever been able to operate reliably, and he went into that office at an hour that made his staff uneasy, and left at an hour that made them worse. He was polite. He was precise. In the middle of a Tuesday, he stood up in a meeting about packaging, said, Give me a minute, walked into his own bathroom and was sick, then washed his face and came back and finished the meeting. Il-sung had never made much of a secret of what he thought of the man his employer had married. He stopped saying it that month, and then he stopped saying anything at all. And twice he came into the office with 2 coffees and left the second one on the desk without a word about it. Ari was the thing that got them both through and the thing that made it unsurvivable. She went between them, half and half, which was not what any clause said, because the clause had been written by a man who thought he was the worse father, and neither of them was willing to say that out loud anymore. The woman who looked after her started coming to 2 addresses and never once asked why. The handovers happened in the car park of a supermarket halfway between, which is where the ugliest conversations of most people's lives take place. The first one, neither of them spoke. The second, Jinho said, She's got a tooth coming, on the bottom left. And Sungmin said, I know. I felt it. And that was all. The third time, Sungmin said, "How's Woojin? How's Woojin? Don't. I'm asking." "You don't get to ask," Jinho said, and got into his car, and sat in it for a while before he was able to drive. And then a thing happened that neither of them arranged, which was that Sungmin kept going on Wednesdays. He had thought about it for exactly as long as it took to get his coat on. He was not doing it to be seen doing it, and he took a precaution to make sure of that, which was that he asked the ward, at the desk, on his own, in the flat voice he used at work, not to tell anybody he had been. Then he went in and sat down in the chair and said, "Evening." And Woojin looked at him over the top of a paperback and said, "You look like a bin. Thanks. He's not sleeping. Neither am I." "Good," Woojin said, and turned a page, and Sungmin sat there most of the evening, and then went home. He came the next Wednesday, and the one after that. He learned how the machine worked and which nurse was on when. He brought the barley tea. He was there the night it went badly, which was a Wednesday. The night Woojin's temperature went up and the room filled with people. Sungmin stood out in that corridor with his back against the wall for the whole of it, being completely useless and completely calm about it. And near the end, one of the nurses came out and told him it had turned, because by then they all knew his face. He sat down on a plastic chair and put his head in his hands and stayed in it until it got light. The ward had rung Jinho as well, Jinho being the number on the file. And Jinho had a sleeping baby in a travel cot, and nobody in the world to leave her with, so he could not come until the morning, and by the morning Sungmin had gone to a shift. Nobody thought to tell Jinho who had been in the chair. He did not tell Jinho. Woojin did, on a Thursday, because Woojin was dying and had stopped seeing the point of things. "He's still coming." Jinho, pouring tea, stopped. "Wednesdays. He never missed one. Not when you took the baby and went. Not since." Woojin let his head fall back on the good pillows. "He was here the night I went over. He told the desk not to tell you, which I have decided is worse, because now I have to. Woojin, you can be as angry as you like. I've got the trump card and I intend to use it." He shut his eyes. He sat out there all night. He was still in it when I came round, and he'd gone before you got here, which is very like him. And I'd rather have had him out there than anybody I have ever met. He opened one eye, except you, obviously. Jinho put the flask down and sat in the chair and did not say anything for a long time. "He did sums about me," he said at last. "I know. You told me. He worked out what I was worth." "Yes," Woojin said. "And then he sat in that chair every Wednesday since, when there is nothing left in it for him." He turned his head on the pillow. "There's no money in me. Nobody's leaving anybody a company." The other thing came the week after. And it came through Il-sung, who did not want to be carrying it. He put a document wallet on Jinho's desk and kept hold of the edge of it a second longer than he needed to. "This came to me weeks ago. Not to you. To me. Specifically, with a note asking me not to show it to you, unless I thought I should." Il-sung's mouth went thin. "I have thought about it every day since, and I hate every part of this. It was a deed. It was drawn up properly, by a firm that was not Jinho's firm, and it was witnessed, and it renounced, in the language these things are written in, any claim by Sungmin on the shareholding, the company, the estate, or anything that had ever been offered him. There was a covering note from the firm, phrased very carefully, saying that a document of this kind might not hold against the law in every particular, and that their client had been told so, and had asked them to draw it up anyway. There was a clause about the house, which he wanted no part of. There was a clause about the settlement figure, which he refused outright. There was no clause about Ari anywhere in it, in either direction. It was signed and dated within the week of Jinho taking Ari and going, and it had been sitting in a drawer ever since. "He hasn't tried to give it to you," Il-sung said. "That's the part that's annoying me. If he'd tried to give it to you, I'd know what it was." Jinho read it twice. Then he put it down and said, "Get my coat." He did not go to the house. He went to the hospital, because it was a Wednesday, and he had worked out that much. Sungmin was asleep in the corridor, and not in the room. Woojin had thrown him out at some point, because Woojin was like that, and Sungmin had gone as far as the plastic chairs by the window, and had fallen asleep sitting up with his coat still on, and his hands loose in his lap, and his head against the wall. The way he slept at work, there was a paper cup of cold tea on the floor by his boot. Jinho stood at the end of that corridor. Then he walked down and sat in the chair beside him, and Sungmin came awake the way people on shifts come awake, all at once, with no soft part in the middle. They sat there. "He told you," Sungmin said. "He did. I asked them not to." "You asked a hospital ward to keep a secret," Jinho said. "You're not a clever man." Sungmin looked at his hands. "Il Sung gave me the deed. That wasn't for you." "I know it wasn't for me. That's the only reason I'm sitting down," Jinho said. "If you'd sent it to me, I'd have burned it in the car park." A trolley went past. Somewhere down the ward a phone was ringing and nobody was answering it. "Say it to me," Jinho said. "Not the money part." "You've said the money part. You said it standing up in my living room, and honestly you were quite good about it. The other part." Sungmin sat forward with his elbows on his knees. He tried 3 times. The first time he got 2 words out and stopped. The second time he said, "I don't know how to." And Jinho said, "I know. Keep going." And the third time, it came out in the wrong order because he had been holding it so long that the shape had set. "I heard you," he said. "I heard all of it. I heard you say she was going to stay here with me and that I was better at it than you, which isn't true, and it's never been true, and I should have come up the stairs and told you that at the time." He stopped. His hands had gone together in front of him. "And I heard you say when I'm not here anymore." And I sat there. When to set her? When to set her? Why? Because if I went up and asked, you'd have said it. Said what? Whatever it was, Sungmin said. And then it would be in the room. And I've spent my whole life being the person who walks into the room. That's the entire thing I am. That's the only thing I've ever been any good at. And I sat at my own kitchen table and I couldn't do it. He looked up. "That's it. That's what I did to you. You went and sat on a floor and said the worst thing you've ever said out loud. And there was a man downstairs who heard every word. And you had to carry that up and down those stairs on your own. Night after night. And I let you do it for 3 months while I made you dinner." Jinho's jaw worked. "I did sums about you and I can't undo that," Sungmin said. "But I didn't sit downstairs because of the money. I sat downstairs because I was frightened. And that's worse. Because being frightened is the one thing I'm supposed to be able to get past." The phone down the ward stopped ringing, and in the quiet after it, Jinho said, "You were going to let me think you loved me. I do love you. You were going to let me think it and never tell me the rest." "Yes. Why?" "Because you were happy," Sungmin said. "And I've never once in my life made you happy on purpose. I made you happy by accident with a hot plate when you were 23, and then I lived off it for years." He put his hands over his face and then took them down again, because he was not going to hide behind them. "And then I found out you weren't ill. In a doorway. With him in the bed. And I had about 1 second of the best feeling I've ever had in my life. And then I understood what I was standing on. And I lied to you. Right there. You had your hands on my face, and I lied to you." "A few days," Jinho said. "A few days. That was the one," Jinho said. "That's the one I'd have hit you over." They sat with that, and then Sungmin said, "I'm not going to ask you to come home." He stood up, and then did not go anywhere. I thought about it, turning up at the house, saying all of it properly with the, "I don't know." And it isn't. That's just me making you do the work again. He stopped and started once more. Worse than the first time. "I'll be here Wednesdays, if he'll have me. And I'll take her whenever you want her taken. That's all it is." He got as far as the end of the corridor. "Sungmin," he turned round. Jinho was standing up by the plastic chairs with his coat over his arm and his face wrecked and absolutely unwilling to move an inch towards him. "You put in that deed that you don't want the house," he said. "Where were you going to live? The station's got beds." "You are the stupidest man I have ever met in my life," Jinho said, and had to stop and get the rest of it out on a second try. And he stayed exactly where he was, and Sungmin stayed exactly where he was, and the two of them stood at opposite ends of an oncology corridor late at night and did not close the distance. Because neither of them was ready, and both of them knew it. It took weeks after that, and none of it was a montage. Jinho came to the house for dinner on a Sunday, and it was awful. They sat at the island with Ari between them in the high chair, using her as a wall, and Jinho asked about the station, and Sungmin answered in short sentences, and at the end of it, Jinho picked his coat up off the back of the chair and said, "This was a bad idea." And Sungmin said, "Yes." The next Sunday was slightly less awful. Jinho asked him a question that was not about the station, and Sungmin answered it badly and at length, and Jinho laughed once, with no sound for the first second, and then stopped himself, visibly. The one after that, Sungmin fixed the tap in the flat above the print shop, and did not stay, and left the notebook by the hot plate when he went. Jinho found it and opened it and discovered that the back page had been torn out. The whole front was still there, and there were new pages, more of them, written in a hand that was not as neat as it had been, in the small hours of nights at a station, and among them was one that said, "Ask him about the bus stop. He'll say he can't remember which cream it was. He can. He remembers everything, and he pretends not to, so people don't think he's showing off." And a later one that said, "I was wrong about which of us you should stay with. I've been keeping the score in my head for years and I put it down wrong. Ask him to tell you about the noodles at 4 a.m. That's who your papa is. He'll tell it like it's a funny story. It isn't." Jinho sat down on the floor of that flat with his back to the radiator that had never worked. He rang him at some hour that had no business being an hour, and Sungmin picked up in one ring, which told Jinho everything about how he had been sleeping. "Come and get us," Jinho said. "Now? She's asleep, so bring the car seat and don't talk in the stairwell." Sungmin was there faster than he had any business being, with his coat over pajamas. They did not fall into each other. They carried a baby down 3 flights, and strapped her in and drove home in a silence with something moving in it. And it was not until they had got her upstairs and into her cot and stood in the doorway of the nursery watching her breathe that Jinho turned round in the dark and put both hands on his husband's chest. "I'm going to be unbearable about this for a long time," he said. "That's fair. I'm going to bring it up in arguments that have nothing to do with it. That's fair. And you're going to tell me things now," Jinho said. "Out loud, in sentences. When you're frightened, you're going to come and find me and say the word frightened, and I don't care if it takes you an hour to get it out. I'll sit there." "Yes, say it now." "I'm frightened," Sungmin said, and his voice did what it had done in the corridor. And Jinho got a handful of the front of his shirt and pulled him down the hall away from the door of the room where their daughter was sleeping, and kissed him against the wall. It was not gentle. Jinho did not want gentle, and had said so with his hands before he had said it with anything else. And Sungmin got a forearm across his back and lifted him off the floor and carried him the last part of the way, and they got the bedroom door shut with somebody's shoulder. Whatever was left of Jinho's suppressants gave up entirely, and the sour red note came up out of him, hot and sweet and unhidden, and the second it hit the air, Sungmin made a sound against his throat that Jinho felt in his knees. "Say it again," Jinho said. "Which one?" "The one about nobody else getting the last note." "Nobody else gets it," Sungmin said, with his mouth at the gland, and Jinho held on to his shoulders and did not let go. And the 2 cents went up together, and made the third thing again. And this time both of them stopped for a second because they had never once in all those years said out loud that it was there. "I've been trying to make that for years," Jinho said. "You can't buy it." "I know, I'm aware. It's extremely inconvenient." They stopped talking after that, and neither of them minded. Woojin lived to see the spring, which nobody had promised him. He got a run of better weeks and then a scan that made a consultant use the word encouraging, which Woojin repeated with deep suspicion for a good while. He came out in April, thin as wire and permanently cold, and moved into the flat above the print shop. Because Jinho owned it, and Jinho was not selling it, and Woojin said the stairs would keep him honest. He worked 2 days a week at Onda in a chair by a window, smelling things and telling graduates that they were wrong, which he described as the best job he had ever had. The gray wallet stayed in the desk drawer, and the letters in it stopped coming, and Jinho never once thought about throwing it out. He told Ari, repeatedly, that her dad had once carried a sofa up 3 flights of stairs and had never got over it. Junsu met Jinho properly at the station open day in the autumn and told him a considerable number of things about Sungmin that were not true, and Jinho listened to all of it with total attention and wrote some of it down. Doyun sold his 4% in the spring, at a price he was pleased with, to a fund Jinho had picked out for him personally and with great care. And Jinho took the meeting himself and was extremely gracious throughout, and Il-sung said afterwards that he had never seen anything so unpleasant done so politely. Sungmin stayed at the station. There was a conversation about that, and it was a real one, at the kitchen island, with both of them being honest in a way that took a while, and at the end of it Jinho said, "I don't want you to leave it. I want you to stop pretending it's smaller than my thing." And Sungmin said, "It isn't smaller." And Jinho said, "I know. Say it in front of other people." There was paper left to deal with, in the end. Jinho's copy of the separation agreement, the only one still in one piece, went into the fire pit in the garden he had never once sat in. And they sat in that garden and burned it, which Sungmin said was extremely irresponsible and did anyway. The back page of the notebook went in with it. Sungmin had been carrying it folded in his wallet since the night he tore it out, and he did not explain why, and Jinho did not ask. And the deed came back out of the wallet Il-sung had carried it in, and Jinho read it again at the island one evening with a pen in his hand. "I'm not tearing it up," he said. "All right. You wrote it when you thought you were never getting me back. I want it in the house." He put it back in its wallet. "Not because I need it, because you needed to write it, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen either." Then he pushed a single page across the stone. It was the custody clause, the one he had written when he had decided he was the worse father, printed out on its own with a line ruled through the middle of it. And at the bottom, in Jinho's own handwriting, there was one sentence: "I had this the wrong way round, and I am going to be here." He signed it. Sungmin signed underneath. It had no legal force of any kind whatsoever, and they kept it in a drawer for the rest of their lives. In the same drawer as the notebook, which was still being written in, and which by then had a great deal in it that was nothing to do with dying at all. Ari walked at the end of the winter, across the kitchen, a few steps from the table leg to Sungmin's knees, and both of them missed it, because they were arguing about whether you can have a barbecue in February. She did it again for them afterwards, twice, and then got bored of it. It was late one evening in autumn when Jinho came down the stairs and put a bottle on the kitchen island in front of his husband. It was a small one, unlabeled, with a hand-cut stopper. "It's not for sale," he said. "Don't ask. I've had the argument with Il-seung and I won." Sungmin took the stopper out, and it was there. All of it. Rain hitting a fire that had just gone out. Wet ash and steam and something sweet underneath. He sat with it in his hand for a moment and then put it down carefully, the way he handled things that could not be replaced. "You got it," he said. "I got it in the spring. I've been sitting on it." Jinho leaned against the counter beside him and looked at the ceiling, at the room above, and then at him. "Do you want to know what it's called?" "Go on." "Stairs," Jinho said. Sungmin put the stopper back in the bottle. Then he stood up and put his hand on the back of his husband's neck and said, "Come up then." The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.